All right, folks, how you doing? So welcome back to another Bad Hair Day video. Today I'm going to be talking about a controversial political figure from the 17 and early 1800s. His name is Henry Dundas, the first Viscount Melville. Now, before we get fully into the video, there's a point I've made before that I really want to hammer home. Because Henry Dundas was a narcissist. Do not apply morality to narcissists. It doesn't apply. If you do that, you're going to be immersed in a fog which is going to obscure your understanding. And if I can impart one lesson to anyone watching this video that HG has imparted to me, HG Tutor that is, do not apply morality to narcissists because you will always fall short. Like, for example, Dr. Kirk with Jimmy and Chelsea. He's viewing that whole thing through a complete fog of emotional thinking. Do not think emotionally when it comes to narcissists. Do not think emotionally and do not apply morality because neither of those things applies to narcissists. All right, just understand that before we go in. And this channel, I'm a normal. I would say I think I'm a normal. I'm very confident on that assessment about myself. I do not serve agendas. I serve the truth. One of the subtitles for this channel before it was True Scottish History. Now I'm calling it Cosmic Apocrypha, but it's also True Human History, the truth about history. I don't serve emotional agendas. I don't operate emotionally. I don't view things emotionally or through morality. I view them and I see them for what they truly are, or at least that is the idea. That's the goal. That's the intention. So when I look at Dundas, I'm not looking at him through the morality distortion field. I look at him for exactly what he is. He was a high functioning, highly intelligent narcissist. And a lot of narcissists do a lot of good in the world as well as evil. Do not think of good and evil. If you think on that level, I cannot help you. Forget about morality. Morality is for school children. Morality is for the unintelligent. Morality is for those who have not learned to look beyond, to really see things for what they are. So let's get into Dundas here. Okay, so Henry Dundas and his vision for the abolition of slavery. So when it started, Joseph Knight and Henry Dundas and their legal battle to change the law of slavery in Scotland. It takes an exceptional person to challenge centuries of oppression. Imagine that person being black, a slave, and a teenager in a Scottish community in the 18th century. That was the situation of Joseph Knight, who years earlier had been taken to Scotland as a slave from Jamaica, and as a young man decided to take on his owner and the Scottish establishment and become a free man. You might wonder why I'm, going into all this. Well, the ancient philosopher Plato, he said something that really stuck with me once. He said, "Courage is a form of salvation." And that has always stuck with me. In order to change the future, we have to confront the past and we cannot shy away from it, warts and all. Scotland was involved in the slave trade. It's not something to be proud of at all, but it is a fact. And these issues do have to be confronted and they have to be dealt with. All right. We don't shy away from these things on this channel. I do not shy away from anything. Why? Well, what was that saying again by Plato? Courage is a form of salvation. Let's go back to this. So Knight needed more than courage, however. While a lower court ruled that he was a free man, his former owner appealed. He needed an exceptional lawyer, one who would be willing to fight for his rights to Scotland's highest courts. And that person showed up in 1776 in the form of Henry Dundas, the newly appointed Lord Advocate for Scotland. Dundas volunteered to take on Knight's case and to lead a formidable group of abolitionist-minded lawyers. Together, they convinced Scotland's highest court to declare in 1778 that Knight was a free man and that no man could be a slave on Scottish soil. Now, again, getting back to narcissism. The thing about mid-range narcissists, and without being too specific, because I don't want to breach H.G. Tudor's confidentiality agreement, so I can't be too specific here without breaking that, because how I arrived at the knowledge that Henry Dundas is a mid-range narcissist was through the Knowing the Narcissist consultation on the Knowledge Vault. So I can't actually go into too much detail on this, but I do know that Dundas was a high-functioning mid-range narcissist, a very intelligent man. Now, the thing about mid-range narcissists is that they operate with a facade. They don't actually care about things. And also, their narcissism is subconscious. So, was Henry Dundas a good man? No, he wasn't. Was he an evil man? No, he wasn't. He was a narcissist. He was a man who operated with a facade. And narcissists will attach themselves to particular causes on a subconscious level. Remember, it's not happening up here, it's happening down here at the subconscious level. Why would a man like Dundas attach himself to the cause of slavery and be in favor of abolishing it? Because as a narcissist, he needs to assert control. Now, you might look at this, what I'm saying here, and say, well, what are you saying, that Dundas attached himself to this cause to make himself look good? Well, fundamentally, yes, that's what I'm saying. Abolition debate reaches the House of Commons. So William Wilberforce, the parliamentary leader of the abolition movement in Britain, quietly started his campaign in the late 17. Okay, so it was in 1780. He quickly gripped the attention of the entire nation. By 1791, he was ready to test the will of the House of Commons and tabled a motion for the quote, the immediate and complete abolition of the slave trade. He knew he did not have anything close to a majority, but he sensed that the tide was starting to turn. So it strikes me that this man, Wilberforce, I'm not sure if he was, but he's behaving here like an empath, which is, what I've said before with Dr. Kirk and Jimmy and Chelsea. The thing about empaths is they don't think things through. And the thing about empaths actually is that they don't think at all, because everything goes through their emotions and their feelings and everything's in their fifis, right? This is where empaths really don't see the world very well or very, very clearly at all. In fact, I would say that narcissists are typically far more intelligent than empaths, because narcissists see things a lot more clearly because they need to in order to assert control of situations and politics and all the rest. Whereas empaths, it's all bleeding heart, feelings, etc. Political correctness is largely fueled by empaths, useful idiots, because they're not using their head because everything's through their feelings. See, how it works is the narcissists set up particular causes and they manipulate empaths into following them. And it's typically at the subconscious level. That's largely what things like political correctness are. If you understand that clearly, then, hopefully I've lifted the fog for you. But let's get back to this. So this is really not very pragmatic, what William Wilberforce wants to do. Morally speaking, morality is for empaths, and to an extent normals who lean towards empathy. So some MPs could not support Wilberforce's motion, but spoke in favour of a plan for a gradual process. In other words, normals and narcissists who are looking at this, people who are not empaths, people who do use their heads and not everything through their feelings. MP Roland Burden, for example, said, quote, he wished to go gradually and not so much at once to the question of abolition. George Sumner was of a similar view, saying, quote, a gradual abolition he would much wish to see. So it was no surprise that Wilberforce's first motion suffered a crushing defeat, 163 to 88. But the words of moderate MPs provided Wilberforce and his fellow campaigners with glimmers of hope that there was room to grow and to persuade men of goodwill to support their cause. Well, obviously, it's a good cause trying to get rid of slavery. I mean, I don't think I need to really elaborate on why that would be a good thing to do. But the thing is, you can't just snap your fingers and overnight it's gone. It doesn't work that way, as we'll see later in the article. You have to do things intelligently and think them out. This is where normals and narcissists really have the advantage over empaths. So let's get back to it here. So in 1792, the political climate around the abolition issue changed. The tireless campaigning by Wilberforce and others was paying off, so they're getting momentum. Good. Hundreds of thousands of British citizens began to sign petitions in support of abolition. Excellent. This is very good news. This time, however, Wilberforce had instructed his supporters to circulate petitions that avoided mentioning immediate abolition. The terms of your petition ought to be such as to allow of a man's signing it who rather recoils from the idea of immediate abolition. So when he returned to the House in 1792, Wilberforce proposed a motion that was, quote, designed to conciliate his more moderate opponents. He ensured that the words immediate and complete were excluded from the motion he presented to the House of Commons April 2nd, 1792, although he acknowledged in debate that immediate abolition was still his preferred policy. Well, it's not going to work that way. It doesn't ever work that way in politics. This time, his motion sought, quote, leave to bring a bill for the abolishing of the slave trade. That's rather badly worded. Without specifying a time for abolition, he assured the House that the motion did not commit them to a deadline, and the time for abolition would be determined later. See, politics is all about give and take. It really is. The opposing forces were still nonetheless formidable. The British economy was still dependent on the slave-based economies in the West Indies. See, that's why I can't just do it like that. It's not all about feelings and doing the right thing and all this sort of thing. This is where, again, impasse falls short. You have to do it gradually. You can't just snap your fingers and it happens, especially in politics. Members of Parliament, some of whom would suffer personal financial setbacks from immediate abolition, were subject to heavy lobbying. Of course, I mean, this is politics we're talking about. Between 40 and 50 members of Parliament were also members of, quote, the Society of West India Planters and Merchants, a lobby group based in London comprised of direct investors, absentee plantation owners, and paid agents who were intent on preserving the slave-based economy in the British colonies. Several peers in the House of Lords were members of the society. There remained, in effect, a virtual wall of opposition against abolition. Even Edmund Burke, a Tory MP who had previously been an ardent supporter of immediate abolition, had lost faith and abandoned the goal of immediate abolition, believing that opposing forces were too powerful to overcome. Even though Wilberforce had watered down his motion, the prospects were still bleak. Historian Dale H. Porter, author of A Definite Text on Britain's Abolition Movement, wrote that the 1792 motion was heading for a resounding defeat. So for the great abolition debate of 1792, so on April the 2nd, 1792, Wilberforce introduced his motion for abolition in the House of Commons. Debate lasted through the night and past 6 o'clock the next morning, with William Pitt delivering an impassioned speech as the first light of morning streamed into the House. Dundas was also, hang on, let's straighten that up. Okay, so Dundas was also one of the last to speak. This was the first time he would speak publicly about the slave trade, as he had been ill and not attending debates around the time of the 1791 motion. In 1792, only the MPs with whom he had spoken privately knew that he favoured a policy of gradual abolition rather than immediate and complete abolition all at once. Why? Because as a high-functioning, high-level mid-range narcissist, Henry Dundas is very intelligent and he sees the situation with much greater clarity than an empath would. The thing about narcissists, especially the higher levels of mid-ranges, they pretty much see things exactly as they are. There's still that distortion feel somewhat, as there always is with narcissists, but as you get higher and higher up the ladder, up the scale, the clearer they see things. So Dundas here, he's not operating from a moral position, but rather a pragmatic position, because higher functioning mid-range narcissists, they do have that element of pragmatism. The distortion field, like I say, is always there to an extent, but you're dealing with somebody in Dundas who is highly intelligent. And just remember, no morality applies to narcissists. By this time, Dundas had risen to become the most powerful politician in Scotland, the Secretary of State for Home Affairs, hardly a surprise given his level and cadre of narcissist, and the right-hand man of the British Prime Minister. Dundas's position on abolition was the subject of intense interest. While abolitionists and many of Dundas's friends were demanding an immediate end to the slave trade, which is never going to happen, he also had to contend with West Indian interests who were threatening economic catastrophe and revolution if the government dared to deprive them of the slaves they thought they needed. See, politics is all about give and take. It's all about balance. Don't go into politics if you're an empath, by the way. You won't do well. Dundas addressed his opening remarks directly to Wilberforce. I agree with my honourable friend as to the material parts of his argument. I am of opinion with him that the slave trade is not necessary. My opinion has always been against the slave trade. I will not therefore vote against his motion. I may, however, think it proper to qualify it. Notice the intelligence in the words of the narcissist. So, in a radical departure from the approach of Wilberforce and other abolitionists, Dundas proposed an end to hereditary slavery as well, i.e., an end to the right of slave owners to lay claim to the children born to their slaves. His vision was that black children would be educated and, after a period of service to the owners, would be emancipated. Dundas said he anticipated, quote, the total annihilation of the slavery of these children. And yet, what do we have these days when folk are talking about Dundas? You hear this all the time in Edinburgh when folk are talking about Dundas, that he opposed the abolition of the slave trade. No, he opposed the immediate abolition of the slave trade. And then you read this. But again, I have to stress this point. Morality doesn't apply. The reason why he's proposing that is for pragmatic reasons. High-level narcissists like him, they're very practical, they're very pragmatic. It's nothing to do with morality. Don't mistake him for being a good person because what you just read there. Don't think he was a good person because what was it he said again? The total annihilation of the slavery of these children. Also, what he's talking about, educating black children. It's not for moral reasons. It's for pragmatic reasons. Dundas argued that there are obvious flaws in proceeding to immediate abolition. He said if Britain abolished the slave trade immediately, it would create a void in the trade and other countries would rush to fill it. See, like I said, practical reasons, not moral reasons. He warned that planters would take to smuggling slaves. See what I mean? Sees things very clearly. And British slave traders would find ways to thwart the laws. That's why you have to do it in phases. He said this would be contrary to the humanitarian goals of abolition. Well, that's just facade management, quite frankly. Dundas proposed a compromise, a motion for abolition, but by gradual means. He moved to amend the motion by adding the word gradually to the motion. And this is where Dundas gets criticised all the time, by delaying the abolition of the slave trade. I would argue, no, he's not delaying the abolition of the slave trade. He's just going about it in a far more intelligent way. If you just try to immediately get rid of it, then the other colonial powers will just step in and fill the void, or they'll create a black market, or both, which makes things infinitely worse. Not least of all for all those who are actually in the slave trade. If this goes underground, it becomes black market and it's not controlled, like it is. If it's not properly regulated, if people start, taking the matter into their own hands, that's going to be infinitely worse than if it is controlled and regulated. So Dundas's proposal was more that plan. Was more than a plan for gradual abolition. Professor Porter observed that Dundas's plan was, in fact, a plan for the eventual abolition of slavery. He meant, that's what I mean. He meant regulations to improve living conditions and to educate Negro children, so that eventually a society of educated, able, free, and loyal native workers would come into being in the West Indies. Dundas was looking far into the future, and he appealed to all men of moderate views to join him in realizing this vision. Exactly, this is what you get with this level of narcissist. High level, mid-range, very intelligent. He's thinking long term. He's thinking big picture. He's not thinking about all the precious feelings of anyone. This is how narcissists can be incredibly effective, and how incredibly necessary, quite frankly, they can be in fields like politics. Things like that, because they do have this vision. In a way no abolitionist had dared to do, Dundas had openly explored the long-range prospects of West Indian society. He accepted emancipation, which Wilberforce feared to mention, as the ultimate goal, and argued that abolition of the slave trade was only one in a series of measures which ought to be taken to realize it. Dundas's motion to amend was adopted by the Commons, 192 in favour, 125 opposed. So that's a massive win. The resulting motion for gradual abolition then passed with an overwhelming majority, 230 in favour, 85 opposed. See how effective narcissists can be, especially upper level, mid-range. For the first time in history, abolition of the slave trade became the official policy of the House of Commons, and the Commons had an opportunity to begin to seek the abolition of slavery itself. Now, this is where we really get into the meat here. Dundas presents a 12-point plan for gradual abolition. After the successful vote, Dundas advised the abolitionists to return to the House with legislation for gradual abolition. They refused. They told him gradual abolition was his idea and he should present a plan. which of course he's now going to go do. In the meantime, they recommitted themselves to immediate abolition and girded themselves for a struggle. 3 weeks later, Dundas returned to the Commons with 12 resolutions. Lacking the support of the abolitionists for his larger vision of abolition of slavery and the slave trade, Dundas narrowed his focus to abolition of the slave trade. What? Did I misread that? Anyway, Dundas prefaced his remarks by reiterating his support for abolition in principle. Several years ago, he had formed his opinion upon the propriety and justice of the abolition of the trade, and the report of the evidence before the Committee of Privy Council had confirmed him in that opinion. I think he was on the Privy Council, actually, if I'm not mistaken. Dundas noted his discussions with those on both sides of the debate about the appropriate length of the transition period. He said the abolitionists set their outer limit for complete abolition of the slave trade at 5 years, while the West Indian interests said 10 years was the minimum. Dundas settled on January the 1st, 1800s, 7.5 years from that day. So he's looking at the middle ground. So Dundas's 12 resolutions included measures to abolish part of the slave trade immediately. Within a year, no British person or ship would be able to conduct human trafficking with any foreign territories. This measure alone would immediately eliminate 45% of British involvement in the slave trade. I mean, that's like fast and effective. You see, this level of narcissists, they really are so intelligent. And as HG says, it said so many times, going blue in the face, narcissists can do a hell of a lot of good. They really can, because the thing about narcissists, especially Dundas level, is they're smart and they're effective and they're really good at what they do. It's not like compare and contrast, Wilberforce says plan, okay, let's just do it like right now. And then Dundas comes along and says, you have to be having a laugh, mate. No, absolutely not. You're going to create a power vacuum. The other colonial powers are going to sweep in and you're going to drive it underground and create a black market. And that's going to make things infinitely worse. You have to do it step by step, one step at a time. Look how intelligent and effective Dundas is. It sounds like I'm praising him and all this. Again, remove the morality from it and just see him for what he is. A very high functioning, high level narcissist, very intelligent. Other measures would add to this reduction. No British colony would be able to import slaves from the Americas, causing a further diminishment. Ships or companies not already in the trade would be prohibited from entering it, which would cause reduction by attrition. Treaties would be negotiated with other countries involved in the slave trade to prevent them from trafficking. Can't say that word today, anyway. Trafficking with Britain's West Indian colonies. The measures also would make human trafficking more expensive through additional fees, thereby discouraging the trade. Look how smart this guy is, honestly. In addition, conditions on ships were to be improved. Children would have to be educated. A particularly controversial resolution was to cut off the trafficking of older Africans, who Dundas said were less susceptible to education and tended to suffer from higher rates of disease and fatality. The plan proposed upper age limits of 20 for females and 25 for males, although he said this particular measure was not essential. Look how much energy and thought and intelligence he's put into this plan. He's thought of pretty much everything. Dundas's plan also included two critical legislative initiatives. A, the government would set up a commission to address compensation to the West Indian interests, and B, it would introduce legislation to provide for enforcement of the new measures. These measures were intended to discourage West Indian interests and slave traders from doing an end run around the legislation. The 12th resolution entailed a plea to His Majesty King George III to make overtures to other slave trading countries to enter into treaties for, quote, the final and complete abolition of the slave trade, and to encourage the passing of regulations in the West Indies that would improve conditions for slaves. The MPs who supported immediate abolition bitterly condemned Dundas's 7.5 year plan. Well, probably normal as an impasse. Dundas indicated a willingness to be flexible, assertion of control, and said a shorter deadline for complete abolition could be considered. He warned, however, that it should be as sorry, I need to reread this. He warned, however, that it should be as too short a time. Who the fuck wrote this? This is badly written. It's confusing. You could word this a lot better, but anyway, he warned that it should be as too short a time since his plan required cooperation of the West Indian legislative assemblies. Again, anything that's involving like legislative assemblies and things like that is going to take time. It's not something that you can just snap your fingers because your fee-fees say so. You have to do it. You have to think things through. This is how Dundas is so effective as a politician. When you look into his, he had all these different titles. He was MP for Edinburgh and the Lothians. He was First Lord of the Admiralty. You don't get into these positions by being a dumbass. He's clearly smart. And again, it's pragmatism. I know I'm broken record, parroting on about this, but remove morality is pragmatism that's driving him. Pragmatism. Always. There's no morality involved in any of it. And yet, look at all the good he's doing potentially. This is how narcissists can be so essential and so effective, especially higher level, mid range ones like Dundas. So let's go back to it here. So, wait a minute, did I read this part? Okay, so abolitionists dismantle Dundas. Oh, bunch of fucking idiots. On the 1st of May 1792, the resolutions were again before the House, and the quote immediate abolitionists disregarded Dundas' warning not to shorten the deadline too much. They heavily amended. Oh, what a bunch of fucking morons. They shortened the transition period, setting a new deadline, January the 1st, 1796. They dispensed with many of the remaining resolutions and removed any reference to compensation. They also removed the proposal for encouragement of international treaties to ban the slave trade. Dundas was talking about getting rid of it. He's talking about entering into international treaties with other colonial powers to get rid of it completely, to negotiate with them and get rid of it. Absolutely. Like, cut the whole thing out. I mean, it would take time, but everything involving politics does take time. When you're dealing with courts and legislation and all this sort of thing, obviously it's going to take time. You can't just snap your fingers. Dundas objected to the scudding of his plan with its dramatically shorter timeline. Nonetheless, records of debate show he did not vote against it. At least one of the leaders of the abolitionist movement was disappointed in the dismantling of Dundas's plan. Bishop Bilby Porteous, a member of the House of Lords and a prominent abolitionist, believed that the shorter deadline jeopardized the prospects of Parliament enacting a bill to abolish the slave trade. Yeah, they're going too far with it. Yeah, he's right. This alteration I most sincerely regret, as I fear it will occasion the entire loss of the question. The term of 8 years is a reasonable term and would probably have prevented further opposition. Mr. Dundas himself told me that the West India planters and merchants would have acquiesced in the annihilation of the trade in 1800. As a member of the House of Lords, Porteous was privy to the opinions of the peers. If Porteous believed that Dundas's plan original spell checker is a thing, Grammarly. Anyway, if Porteous, I know, sorry, I'm a bit of a grammar fiend. Porteous believed that Dundas's original plan, could have survived a vote in the House of Lords. That is good evidence that there were sufficient numbers of moderates among the Lords to make it possible to achieve a successful vote for gradual abolition. The abolitionists, it turned out, had pushed the House of Lords beyond the terms or beyond the limits it would tolerate. The Lords declined to support the amended plan. For fuck's sake. They decided to hear evidence. After starting hearings on the issue, they adjourned and later dropped the matter altogether, effectively quashing it. And somehow Dundas is to blame for this? How? They quashed his plan. That was his plan. That was unbelievable. How is this Dundas's fault? It is apparent, therefore, that it was the gutting of Dundas's plan that caused the motion to fail. Abolitionists squandered an opportunity to enact an achievable plan that would have reduced the number of traffic slaves by 300,000 between 1793 and 1800. Let me read that again. Apparent, therefore, it was the gutting of Dundas's 12-point plan that caused the motion to fail. Abolitionists squandered an opportunity to enact an achievable plan that would have reduced the number of traffic slaves by 300,000 over the course of 7 years between 1793 and 1800. How the fuck is this Dundas's fault? Anyone who says that Dundas was responsible for this does not know their facts. They're talking a load of pish. This vindicates Dundas completely. It was the gutting of his plan that led to 300,000 people being put into the slave trade. They didn't have to be. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And Dundas is blamed for this. Abolition. Oh, this is where it goes really good, eh? Abolitionism. How's this Dundas's fault? It clearly is not. Wilberforce and other abolitionists later blamed Dundas for intentionally causing the loss of the motion. If Dundas were genuinely opposed to abolition in 1792, he did not need to add the word gradual to Wilberforce's motion. He did not need to speak at length about the prospect of emancipation and the existence of a free and educated population of Africans in the West Indies. He did not need to develop a 12-point plan, yet he went out of his way to do all these things. If Dundas wanted Wilberforce's motion to fail, all he had to do was sit back and watch it go down in defeat, because it was voted down before he got involved. Regardless of how the House of Commons might vote, the House of Lords was certain to defeat the motion. Instead, Dundas leaned into the issue. He developed a multifaceted, incremental approach that would alleviate the conditions of slaves while reducing the numbers trafficked and set the groundwork of or for emancipation. So Dundas comes out on the right side of history when you really look. The abolitionists underestimated the man that Dundas was, an experienced politician. Dundas knew that substantial reforms required the building of coalitions and a willingness to hear from all stakeholders, a reality that is as true today as it was in the late 18th century. His plan responded to multiple stakeholders while working towards an achievable goal. Abolitionists, frustrated, suspicious, and angry over what they perceived as defeat, missed a crucial opportunity. They failed to notice that Dundas had opened a door to an exceptional opportunity to achieve their goals and to have one of the most powerful members of the government on their side. Point 9 there. What would Joseph Knight say? I'll maybe make another video about this. An important truth stands out in the abolition debate of 1792. Henry Dundas was the first parliamentarian in Britain to speak publicly in favour of the abolition of slavery and the slave trade. Modern historians have ignored this fact, and modern activists seem to be unaware of it. One cannot help but wonder what Joseph Knight would have said. 14 years after the Court of Session declared him a free man, would Knight have judged Dundas as harshly as his critics then and now? Or would he have condemned Wilberforce for waiting decades to pursue the abolition of slavery? Everything that Dundas was proposing was through pragmatism, not morality. Wilberforce, to my mind, the way I'm looking at it there, he's doing it, out of sentiment because it's morally bad. And of course, slavery is morally evil. I mean, obviously. But this is how high functioning, high level, mid range narcissists, they evaluate the situation clearly. They come up with an excellent plan that would have really worked. They put everything into it. It's well thought out. It's intelligent. Dundas clearly here was trying to do his best, and it's the other fucking politicians who came along and ruined it. If I could adopt a personal motto, it would be look again and really do your research and really, study it. Anyway, I'm just rabbiting at this point, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you the next time.